Welcome to You Can Cook Anything with Bob and JP. I'm JP, and today I'd like to share with you a live stream that I recently broadcast on Facebook. Sometimes I like to roast my own coffee beans, and I do this by acquiring some green coffee beans online and using a popcorn popper. Stick around and watch how it's done. This is a popcorn popper. That's a hard drive. They both play their own roles in here, but the hard drive is probably not super necessary, but the shape is kind of important. You'll notice some ants joining us in and out of this video. In any case, I have some green coffee beans. These are unroasted coffee beans, and the popcorn popper is actually hot because I just roasted a batch. I can only do about 100 grams of beans in a batch, and so we're gonna check these out. We're gonna put these into the already hot popcorn popper, and it's actually a little bit hotter than I like it to start out. So what I do is to kind of even out some of the heat before I turn the heat back on, is I use a bamboo spoon to just, it's obviously teetering a little bit, stir the beans, let the heat be dissipated into distributed into the green beans before I turn the heat on. And there are a few kind of interesting phases that I hope we get to see in this video, because you can actually roast beans mostly by kind of sensing the state the beans are in, because there are a couple of indicators that you watch out for. Alright, that's probably good enough. So this is going to make some noise, but I'm going to turn the popcorn popper on now, and there we go. So what you want to see is the beans circulating. It's kind of important because you don't want them to, I'm going to tilt it towards the sun, you don't want them to get too hot and scorch. That's why you use only 100 to 105 grams of beans for this popcorn popper. I found that out just by trial and error, figuring out how much of a container of green beans I could use. Green beans are heavier than roasted beans, so they get lighter and they move more as they start to roast. What you see flying out of there as they roast, and that chaff is something that you don't want in the final roasted beans. So it's good that it kind of flies away, because it gets it would get burnt otherwise. The brand of popcorn popper is a Wherever popcorn pumper that my family has had since I was probably a teenager, and so this is it's got a pretty decent power, but I have done this with more modern popcorn pumpers, so I know that the newer ones have enough power to roast coffee as well. I kind of figured out how I could do this with this popper, partly by trial and error, because different poppers may have different power levels. And okay, so you can see that the beans are starting to actually hop a little bit in the popper now. They're like bouncing more because they're starting to get lighter, and I'm gonna have to use the top of the popcorn popper soon to keep them from like jumping out. But I want to wait a little bit until the chaff is mostly gone, and then I'll show you what I use the hard drive for. Alright, they're actually bouncing quite a bit, so I'm going to put the top on, the popcorn popper. Okay, I don't know if you heard that. We're going to hear more of it in a second. So what we're waiting for now is first crack, which is an important stage in roasting coffee. Here's what I do with the hard drive. I put it under the front, and I tilt the popper back so that as the beans get lighter, they don't fly out of the popcorn popper. But just in case they might fly out, I put a I put a bowl here. Not super important because I don't think we're going to get anything in the bowl other than chaff. So, well, we'll see. Hopefully not. So we're about to enter the first crack stage of roasting. There are 2 crack stages of roasting, which just means that the beans actually make a popping sound. The first stage is much louder. Okay, so I don't know if you can hear. Maybe I'll be quiet and let you hear some of them popping. You probably heard that. It's at the first crack stage. The cracking sounds like a loud snap, and it's got some depth to it. So the smell, I should describe the smell. It doesn't smell that great. You would think it would smell really good. Fresh roasted coffee smells good once it's like cooled down and sat for a while, but while it's roasting, it's off-gassing a bunch of chemicals that you don't want in your coffee, and so it's a bit of a biting aroma. It's slight. There's a slight burning smell, probably from some of the chaff. So it's not great. It's a smell that when I do this, I have done this indoors and my family didn't love it, put it that way. So they prefer I do this outdoors. And you can tell from all the chaff that this generated at first. There's a challenge doing it indoors because you have to somehow contain the chaff and so that it doesn't fly all over. What usually happens when I do it indoors is I do it in a room away from people. It does fly around. Did it in my exercise room, and then I have to vacuum the room down because my efforts to keep the chaff contained are only marginally successful. So I'm just flipping the chaff. There's really no chaff is useless. It's just a papery coating of the green beans. Okay, so we basically passing through the first crack stage, and then in between. So I'm not such an expert in roast levels that or as picky at the moment in roast levels that I'm trying to hit a specific target. So I'm trying to give you a feeling making this video that you can kind of roast beans by just listening for a couple of signposts along the roasting process. And if you want to be a lot more precise, you might time things or take temperature readings, but you can actually do it just by listening to the beans. So you know you have to get through first crack, and when you get to second crack, I think second crack, like in the middle of second crack, is probably what people consider to be a full city roast. Sometime in between first and second crack is a light roast, and then once second crack is done, you're starting to get more into the dark French roast territory. So what I do is I let it get to second crack, and then sometime after second crack happens, I stop it, and that's close enough. It's it's roasted beans, and I can make coffee out of it, and I know it's going to be decent. So I'm not super careful with where in the roast I stop it. You can see part of why I'm doing this video is it gives me an idea of how long the second batch is going to take once the popcorn popper is heated up. So far I'm not hearing any second crack, but soon I will. This thing was pretty warm when I started, so it goes quickly through the stages, and it's a very small amount of beans. So sometimes I lift. Okay, I may be hearing the beginnings of second crack. It's often slightly higher pitched and less loud. The other thing you can, so because second crack is a little bit more subtle, you also go by smell. So the more roasted this gets, the more this actually starts to smell more burned. Actually, you get a more of a roast smell. I got these green coffee beans. These beans I got a while ago from an online green coffee bean club, where there are people who will buy large amounts of beans and then distribute them at cost to people who join the group, and which is really nice of them. And sometimes the prices you get are really good. You can get smaller amounts of beans. They buy whole like giant sacks of beans to do that. But you can get smaller amounts of beans at places like Sweet Maria's online. At least that's where people were getting beans back when I first started this. That was over a year ago now, so I don't know where else people might be getting their green beans. We are definitely in second crack stage here. I'll be quiet for a second. If you can hear that light crackling, I don't know if you can over the motor, that's second crack. So we're getting to the point where I want to stop this roast now. So I'm going to do that, and I'll turn this off, and then I want to quickly take the top off before I dump it out, which is a little bit of a challenge because it's very hot and I didn't get my gloves. You know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to tip this thing over. Ooh, okay, that's very hot. Trying to do this with one hand is a challenge. There we go. Oop, top came off anyway, or the top of the top. All right, this roasted, because I was talking, this roasted a little bit further than my target was. Oh, there goes another bean. And so you're starting to actually see, do you see a little oil on some of those beans? That means this roast is getting to the dark roast stage, the very dark, not the darkest roast. Some beans can be actually burnt, you know, they can be so dark. But this is probably past a full city roast if you go by the terminology roasters use. I'm not, like I said, I'm not an expert, but I know that that oil already being visible means it's past where I generally target for roasted beans. And I've got my previous batch, I'm just going to dump them together. So that's 2 batches, so it's about, starting, that was like 200 grams of beans. And sometimes I put these over a fan to cool them off. It's best if you can cool them off quickly, but I don't worry too much about that because you can see that I'm kind of doing this for convenience rather than for precision. Because fresh roasted beans, even if they're not quite on target or not perfect, are still a lot better a lot of the time than store-bought beans. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. Remember what Bob and I always say.